Good day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leaders Podcast, a podcast where we share insight, knowledge, and have experts, international leaders in the investigative and intelligence industry from around the globe sharing their knowledge and experience in terms of how the industry's evolved and what we can expect. Today, I'm honoured to be joined by Mr. Kelly Riddle, who's president of Kelmar Global Investigations. Now, Kelly, I read your bio and it is huge. You are one of the industry's most prominent figures. You've been in the industry more than 40 years, sit on various boards, have won numerous accolades, and it's an honor to have you here today. So if you just want to give us a real short introduction, and then we can start the discussion.
Sure. All right, Mike, I appreciate it, man. Seems like you and I are globetrotting all over the place, and we cross paths all the time, usually at conferences, but so I actually live in San Antonio, Texas, and, we're licensed throughout the whole of North America. And so, we specialize in a lot of different things, including corporate investigations and electronic bug sweeps and all types of different investigations. But, to be part of this, chat, I appreciate you having me on, and I'm looking forward to, tossing this back and forth a little bit.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kelly. So, Let's kick it off straight into the association arena. Giving back your time to associations in non-paid positions, devoting your time to the industry and pushing the industry along, as it were. Give us an overview in terms of what you get from associations, a bit about your role in some of the associations that you're interactive with, and how that benefits investigators on all levels.
Yeah, so I actually belong to 24 different associations, and it's everything from state level to national and international. And I do that for a lot of different reasons. Selfishly, it helps promote me and my business. But in addition to that, it gives me a lot of resources, which I need because, like you, I do work all over the globe. And so I need those different resources because we can't be everywhere. So, I started off joining the Texas Association of Licensed Investigators back in, 1990 or something like that. And I quickly understood how important being a part of an association was because the associations help set the tone for the industry. We're always battling legislation. We're trying to promote professionalism. And so I figured that out real quick in my career. And so with that, I ended up becoming the president of the Texas Association. And along the way, I became one of the advisory board members for the Florida Association of Private Investigators. And, I sit on 6 different board of directors. And like you said, Mike, you know the drill. I mean, they're all unpaid positions. But if you're going to be, a leader in the industry, you got to give back.
Yeah, 6 boards, Kelly. That's some achievement. And how'd you get time to do some work, right? There's always something going on with associations. There's always something that comes up that takes your time. But it isn't just joining the associations that's important. You've got to take part. You've got to be known. You've got to network. You've got to get in there and make some of these sort of private business and personal relationships with other investigators and experts in fields that maybe you don't really understand. So in terms of networking with other investigators at local, state and national level, talk to us a little bit about your role at the NCISS and what is NCISS?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So that's the National Council of Investigative and Security Specialists. And it was actually formed 50 years ago this year. And surprisingly, it was formed in Chicago, which is where, WAED is going to have their, big anniversary convention, conference this year. So, Chicago has a lot of apparently roots for our profession, but, NCISS, its main function is to oversee legislation that would affect our industry. And part of that is, like in March, we'll be meeting in Washington, D.C., and we do what's called Hit the Hill. And so we have some pre-meetings with our own association, and we talk about what bills are coming down the path that we need to either support or try to deter. And so after we do that, then we actually go to the Hill and we meet with our legislators and see if we can influence them one way or the other to either promote or dissuade the bills, so that we still have access to records. Because as you know, the United States is a little bit more open with our records, and they keep trying to close them, on different levels. So that's our fight.
And these legislators, they listen to NCISS when you're one voice. They take on board what us as investigators have challenges with.
Yeah, they usually do. It's one of those things. Most of the state associations belong to NCISS, so we can go in and we say, look, we've got whatever it is, 10,000 PIs from all the various state associations, and we happen to be the voice for them. And unfortunately, as associations and industries go, we're not the biggest one out there. The real estate agents and the attorneys and lawyers and all that kind of stuff, they get a lot more attention than we do, but we actually have lobbyists. And so between all of that, if we're not there, then we're not going to be heard. So we
Understood.
At least have to try.
And does that help with, say, private and public synergy in terms of private sector investigators and public sector like law enforcement and other sort of agencies? How is that relationship in the US? Because I've been speaking to investigators from all over the world, and every sort of jurisdiction has its challenges, has what's acceptable. The working relationships are sort of maybe not easy, some more than others. What's your perspective of that?
Yeah, so I was former law enforcement before I became a PI, so I understand both sides of that coin. But it typically, it's always they want information from us, and they don't want to really give us a lot. But over the years, you also lean on those relationships that you have, and so I have found that if I can go in and say, look, Michael LaCorte, he spoke well about you, and he knows you, and so I'm not asking you to open your file, but I'm asking you to give me some assistance and work together, and that usually works. But it's definitely not a
very
two-way
similar.
street.
Well, to be honest with you, depending on some of the investigators I've spoken to, I mean, for example, here in the UK, it is a one-way street. We share with the public and the public authorities, and we get very limited back unless there's a specific MOU that you can work together with. But that's like you said, long process and a relationship that's been developed over time. Give me an idea on numbers of investigators, Kelly, in Texas compared to the US. How many do you think are operating in the private sector? Yeah,
we have somewhere around 6,000 or 7,000, and that obviously fluctuates. So, we're one of the bigger states, obviously, so we have more investigators. But, our licensing board, we have to be licensed in almost every state. And so, the bureau that we are licensed under, they don't give us a lot of flack. They usually go after the security guards because they are more prolific, and so they have more complaints. But, from a licensing standpoint, in Texas, we actually, if you're going to own or manage a PI agency, you have to sit for a written test. And then after that, then you have to show proof of liability insurance. And then you now have a company manager, and that company manager can now hire private investigators who don't.
So that's one test per company, right? So you've got one responsible person, and is it an exam to take, something that you study for?
Yeah, they have kind of a study guide, and mainly they have two different licensing statutes, and so if you read both of those and are familiar with those, generally speaking, you'll pass. Right. So it's not a critical test, but you
fantastic.
Do have to pass
so you've got 5,000 or 6,000 investigators in Texas, and that's just one state. And then throughout the US, have you got any numbers on that? Any stats?
Yeah, I've seen different numbers. So it fluctuates somewhere around 50,000. It fluctuates up and down, but that also includes all of the part-time guys, the former law enforcement that, go down to Florida and semi-retire. So, how many of those are active? I don't know that anybody knows.
Yeah, no, I get it. So, the US in itself, in terms of conducting state-to-state work, is that like a regular thing for investigators to cross states and do work in more than one state? I'm trying to compare it to Europe, for example. If we've got investigations over here that move from one European jurisdiction, is that quite common
it is
in the
now
US?
Because as you know, we're more of a global community, and so but most states like Texas does not have what they call a reciprocity agreement with any other state. And so if someone from California or Florida comes to Texas, they cannot operate unless they're operating with a local investigator. And so other states, like I'm licensed in almost every state, and so they have reciprocity with, I don't know, anywhere between 3 to 10 different states. So that helps out. But it also means that not each one of those states, a lot of those states, you also have to take a written test for those states as well. So it can be cumbersome to get licensed in all those states.
Just listening to you now, Kelly, with the responsibilities you have with 6 association board of director positions and keeping yourself up to date and licensed in all of these states, that's a job in itself. Where do you have time to investigate?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We've had this conversation offline, and so we both understand that we got into this because we love investigations, but at some point you then have to figure out, all right, are you going to be a one person operation, or are you going to grow the business? And growing the business means you got to step out of the field, and you hate to do that because that's your first love,
Yeah, which is a perfect point that moves me straight into leadership. Becoming a leader or operating as a leader has, there are issues along the way, and you're right in terms of changing the direction in what you do. What started out to be investigating a case from start to finish, whatever that may be, as you grow your journey in this industry, so do your responsibilities. Talk to us a little bit about your leadership journey, where you can provide some shortcuts actually to people that are looking to do what you do, and maybe some of the advice in navigating those.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the first thing they should do is get involved with their local association, and then once they have been a member for a couple of years, they need to volunteer to be on the various committees. And then once you're on a committee, then you need to step up and apply for one of the board positions. And the first time I sat on a board, it was eye-opening because the leaders lead in different, they have different personalities. They have, some want to be more transparent than others. And so you really need to adapt and learn, what the best method is. And, over the years, I've seen some associations that almost implode because they have internal arguments. And so it's a personality juggle, just like it is with anything else. But, getting involved in committees and then stepping up onto the board and, being directors and presidents and all that other stuff it's eye-opening. It matures you as an individual and as a business person. And it also, puts back into the industry itself.
Yeah, completely. And sometimes, especially when you're in the industry relatively new, a few years in, or join an association for the first few years, stepping up and putting yourself out of your comfort zone sometimes isn't the right objective for a lot of the investigators in the private sector. They're good at drilling down and investigating and being responsible and taking on responsibility as part of a committee or chairing a committee. That's sometimes can be uncomfortable, right? So it's putting yourself out of that comfort zone. And I agree, just trying to different skill sets, networking with your fellow professionals at that level. So how do you see in terms of, like you said, leadership and whatever else, and joining and putting yourself up there in terms of association? That's great in the US. What about on an international level?
International, I mean, to me, a lot of it depends on what your goal is. For me, that's one of the things I probably should have done, is step up into the international arena a lot sooner than what I have. And, because it's like everything else. You have, you and I have worked cases together. And so you develop those dynamics and resources that you are definitely going to need. And it can be a little bit, uncomfortable because of the language barriers, because, I've had this conversation with international investigators, and, years ago I had someone tell me that, you Americans are so closed-minded because you only speak one language. And I said, yeah, but I said, I can cross 4 different countries in Europe in less time than it takes me to drive across the state of Texas. So, unless you're like in Texas or near the Canadian border, you don't really need any other language. And so that can be a little bit uncomfortable for some investigators stepping up into the international level.
Yeah, completely. And there's a big world out there, and there's a lot of work as well. And maybe some of the smaller states where or if you're in a niche environment where actually you want to develop more business, connecting with other PIs around the world potentially could open up some more avenues, some more doors. And then you've got all the cultural issues, the what you can and can't do in certain jurisdictions because of the privacy legislation and all of the other nuances that you sort of learn and develop as you progress. How do you see the industry change, Kelly? You've seen, your past 40 odd years of private sector investigating and providing security services throughout the US. How have you seen it change to now, and how do you see the industry continue to evolve?
That's a great question. So a year ago, December a year ago, I have a online PI training school called the PI Institute of Education, and we put out a survey, and the survey was kind of eye-opening because when I first got into this profession, at least 75% of the investigators were former law enforcement. And so now it was right around 45%. And so I think the professionalism is increasing quite a bit because you now have people that set out to become a private investigator. They didn't do it just by accident. And so the level of professionalism is increasing, and the type of investigations are certainly not the kind that movies make it out to be, where all you're doing is doing cheating spouses. So now there's all the forensic stuff, the electronic bug sweeps. There's so many different things that have developed because of technology. And you're right, you having the niche and stuff, that's really where you can make the higher dollar per hour if you have a specialty.
Yeah, completely agreed with you. It's the same this side of the pond as well, where when I started, it was very high, maybe even higher than 75% were ex something or other, public service or military or what have you, and then come into the industry towards retirement. So at an older age, now we've got a lot more entry level investigators with different backgrounds and skill sets. Some could be banking, some could be forensics, some could be, just different backgrounds, which I think complements the investigation and intelligence world, because you're providing unique skills to investigating, all types of matters. So what challenges do you see the younger guys coming in compared to, mixing in with a industry that was predominantly led by people that have come out of careers in the law enforcement or the intelligence services or in the military? What are the challenges for some of the younger guys that are trying to come into this industry?
I think part of the problems that they are having is competition, because it is getting a lot more competitive for those few positions that open up. Like my company, we don't have a lot of openings. I have people that have been with me 25 years. And so it's really hard to work into a position like that. So it's more competitive. But on the flip side of that, I recognize that I'm getting older, and my technology skills is not like a 24-year-old. I mean, they know everything about social media and a lot of things about cryptocurrency and stuff that I may not know about. So they definitely have their skill set that would be valuable as well.
Yeah, those are the different skill sets, exactly right, and different opportunities. But for the younger guy that's thinking, right, I want to be a private investigator, I'm going to set up in Texas, I'm going to incorporate my company, sit and take the test. What advice, how can you help those individuals that maybe can't find employment because, like you say, the competition's fierce, and they're in that balance between not having enough skill sets maybe, or trying to start on their own?
Well, part of it is doing like we're talking about, being a part of an association, because we have ongoing trainings. We have a lot of associations have monthly webinars, and then you have the conferences that you can go to. And frankly, I very seldom ever subcontract work to somebody that I haven't met, because you and I go to so many conferences. We meet so many different people, so therefore it gives us a ready-made resource pool of investigators. And I had the need several years ago. I needed somebody that was very well trained in maritime, shipwrecks and that kind of stuff. And we actually had a member that had that skill set. So you never know. But the first thing they need to do is just get out there and mingle with investigators. And because a lot of companies will subcontract and they'll bring in people on a per job basis. So at least they get their foot in the door and start getting work that way.
Yeah, exactly. Meet and network, because you never know who you're going to meet when you turn up at these events. And I get it. I hear it a lot with some of the, say, smaller 1-2 man shops that take a week or 4 or 5 days out of work to go to an event where they're not going to be earning. Sometimes there's that challenge as well. But, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to try and make these relationships personable. Same with you, Kelly. We instruct people that we meet, that we've developed that relationship with. You've met them privately and professionally through a networking event, for example, and then that person's going to do your job to your ability, and not going to, you're actually giving someone the responsibility to work on your particular job for your client. So you want to make sure that who you're using is not going to, do anything they shouldn't do, right? And that's challenging, especially with the way the world is now and how interactive they all are.
I tell people all the time that there's two different mindsets related to that, and so a lot of people that even come out of law enforcement, they don't have the skill set from a business standpoint. And so, like some associations, like Texas, we have a professional designation, Texas TBI, Texas, whatever it stands for. I'm sorry, I just drew a blank, but it's a special certification that you have to sit for, another test and an oral exam and everything else. And a lot of people want to apply for that, but you can't. You first have to have 5 years experience as a private investigator, not in law enforcement, because there's huge distinction between those people that have done law enforcement and those that have done private sector work, and then to your point, one of the biggest clients I've ever gotten was because it was at a conference, and it happened to be a large corporation that sent 2 of their in-house investigators to this conference. And I met them, they were impressed with me, and they started assigning work to me. And several years ago, we billed out over $4 million on one case to that client. So you never know where you're going to meet a client. You never know where you're going to, meet that person that's going to really be useful.
Yeah, 100%. You really don't know who you're going to meet at conferences. You're right. I had very similar experience talking at a bar. It wasn't even in one of the professional seminars or anything like that. It was just a casual last-minute conversation at a bar towards the end of the event. And I met someone that's turned into a client for nearly 20 years. It's just it. And, again, if you're not there, if you don't show up and you're putting yourself out there, you're minimizing your chances of interacting and networking in this industry. And sometimes I think being from public sector, you've got huge resources in terms of deploying big teams, and you are maybe a particular type of investigator. You've got a research team, a tech team, a surveillance team, all in-house. When you come into the private sector, you're on your own, right? You've got to try and put that together yourself. So you can't just make a phone call and get someone else to run whatever it is that you need to be run. So you have to wear more than one hat, as they say. I want to finish off, Kelly, with some key takeaways on your leadership philosophy and advice. And that is to not just to the younger guys coming into the industry. It could be some of the old hats that are out there that are, one track and stuck in their ways. Just your philosophy. What's made you successful as you are today? And what could you pass down in terms of some
I think one thing
is
consistency. That's why chains like Coca-Cola and McDonald's are so popular, because they're consistent. And so that's what we need to be in business as well, because your clients come to you because they expect you to give them a good result every time, and that means that you have to be consistent. So that's really an important aspect of it. And the other thing is to I tell my staff, don't ever say no. If someone calls you and they've got something that's a little bit out of your normal services, don't turn them down. They came to you for a reason. You spent money on advertising, or you got someone that referred them to you by word of mouth. So you can have the resources through the associations and the networking to fulfill that job. So, very seldom should you turn down a case. And so consistency, saying yes, answering the phone. There's so many times where I hear people go, I called 3 other PIs and I didn't answer the phone, and you guys answered it. So, why spend the money if you're in marketing and stuff if you're not going to answer the phone?
Completely. Consistency, provide solutions, and be contactable. Those are the three key takeaways that Kelly Riddle has given us all. Kelly, it's been a pleasure talking shop with you. Yeah. Always love our conversations. Thank you for everything you're doing for the international industry, the investigative industry through the US and through the world. Thank you. It's great connecting with you. Thanks again. If anyone wants to hear or contact Kelly Riddle, his details are coming up on the screen at the bottom for you now. It's another episode of Leaders. Thank you again.